They always said I didn't belong. Too rough around the edges. Too much grease under my fingernails. Tonight I made sure they were right. I stood in my own restaurant watching my in-laws celebrate without me waiting for the cake to land. That moment right there in the warm light of Riverbend Supper Club was when everything I'd held in for years finally settled into place. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel nervous. I felt steady, like the ground under me had finally stopped shaking. The funny part is they had no idea I was even in the building. They thought I was home in my garage like usual, tinkering with an old carburetor or drinking a cheap beer at the VFW. That was the story they liked. That was the version of me they were comfortable with. And I guess I let them believe it for too long. The truth was, I'd been standing in the back kitchen for almost an hour, leaning on the stainless steel counter while the cooks hustled around me. I still smelled faintly of motor oil, even after scrubbing my hands 3 times with that gritty orange cleaner mechanics swear by, but I didn't bother trying to hide it. That smell was part of me. Always had been. From where I stood, I could see the edge of the dining room through the pass window. My wife, well, she was still my wife at the time, sat at the long table near the big picture window overlooking the Cedar River. Laura always loved that spot, said it made her feel classy. Her mother Carol was perched right beside her, smiling like the Queen of Iowa. And on Laura's other side sat Ryan, her best friend. I watched them laugh at something. I couldn't hear what it was, but I saw Laura touch Ryan's arm. That tiny gesture. Light familiar, a little too familiar. Someone clapped their hands in the kitchen behind me. It was Jenna, the pastry chef, a girl in her 20s with bright red hair pulled into a messy bun. She lifted the cake box and looked at me. "You ready, Mr. Reed?" I nodded. "Yeah, let's do it." She hesitated, chewing the inside of her cheek. I know this is your business and your family. You sure you want the cake to go out like that?" I didn't blame her for asking. The cake wasn't decorated in the usual way. No pastel frosting, no polite little message. Instead, right in the center, printed clean and glossy, was a photo of Laura and Ryan in a motel room off I-380. Her hands were on his shoulders. His were around her waist. Their faces were too close to explain away. I wasn't proud of what the picture showed. I wasn't proud of how I'd gotten it either, but I was done being made a fool of. I looked at the cake, then looked back at Jenna. "Yep, bring it out right when they start singing." She let out a slow breath. "Okay, you're the boss." That still felt strange to hear. The boss. 2 months earlier, I was just the guy who fixed brake lines and alternators in a rundown garage on First Avenue. The guy who people tipped $5 at Christmas if they remembered. The guy Laura sometimes apologized for when she thought her friends from church could hear. But things change, and they had no idea how much. As Jenna carried the cake out of the kitchen, my heart didn't race the way you'd think. If anything, it slowed down, got quieter. I was more aware of the sounds around me, the sizzle from the grill, the clink of glasses in the dining room, the soft hum of conversation floating over it all. Then the singing started. "Happy birthday to you." The voices drifted through the pass window. I stepped closer, resting both palms on the stainless counter, leaning forward just a little so I could see. Laura was smiling wide, her perfect teacher smile, the one she used in school photos every year. Carol clapped with her fingertips. Ryan leaned back, grinning like a man who didn't have a care in the world. Then Jenna stepped into view with the cake. She placed it right in front of Carol. For a second, just 1 second, nobody understood what they were looking at. Their faces stayed soft, cheerful. The singing tapered off. A few people chuckled. Someone said, "What is that?" Then Carol leaned forward. Her smile faltered. Her eyes narrowed. And the whole table went silent. Laura's hand flew to her mouth. Ryan stiffened in his chair. One of the cousins let out a confused, That was my cue. I pushed open the swinging kitchen door and stepped into the warm glow of the dining room. My shoes felt heavy on the polished floor as I walked toward the table, not rushing, not hiding, just moving. Like I'd waited years to take those few steps. A few people turned when they saw me. Some recognized me immediately. Others looked confused, like they weren't sure why the mechanic had wandered into their fine dining experience. Laura looked up, her face pale. "Mike, what are you doing here?" I gave her a small, almost polite smile. "Evening, folks," I said. "Hope the food's been good." And then I laid my hand on the back of the chair beside her mother, steady and calm, and said the words I'd been waiting to say for weeks. "I'm Michael Reed. I'm the new owner of Riverbend Supper Club." The shock hit them like cold water. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I truly belonged in the room. I didn't always stand in rooms like that, rooms with linen tablecloths, candlelight, and people speaking in soft voices like they were afraid of disturbing the air. Most of my life, I stood on cracked concrete floors under flickering fluorescent lights with the sound of impact wrenches snapping through the garage bay. That was my world, the world I understood. And honestly, I never thought it was something I had to apologize for. But Laura's family, well, they had a different point of view. Back when I first met her, none of that mattered. She was 28, funny, sharp as a tack, always reading a book or talking about her students at Roosevelt Middle School. I was 40 already, bald on top, already a little rough, but she didn't seem to mind, at least not back then. Her family smiled at me at first, polite smiles, thin smiles. The kind of smiles you give someone when you're not sure they should be standing on your front porch. At our first Thanksgiving together, her mother asked me where I banked. I told her Midwest Community Credit Union over on Boyson Road. She blinked twice, then told me they used Great Plains National Bank because interest rates reflect stability. That was the first sign. Should have paid more attention. But love makes you foolish. Makes you believe you can bridge certain gaps if you just try hard enough. As the years passed, the comments got sharper. Once, when Laura and I arrived at one of those potlucks they held in the church hall, her Uncle Tom shook my hand and said, "Mike, you ever think about dressing up a bit just so you fit in?" I was wearing clean jeans, a button-down shirt, my good boots, but I guess that wasn't enough. Laura brushed it off later, saying, "They don't mean anything by it. It's just how they are." And I let it go because she asked me to. But you can only let so much go. There were family dinners I didn't need to come to. There were weddings where I didn't really know anybody. There were charity events where I might feel out of place. Little exclusions one after another until it formed a kind of wall around them, a wall I wasn't welcome behind. Even after we got married, nothing changed. But Uncle Robert, he was the opposite of all that. He was my dad's brother, a lifelong bachelor, sharp-witted, stubborn, and generous in a quiet Midwestern way. He built Riverbend Supper Club from the ground up. Back in the 70s, it was a supper club in the old Wisconsin sense. Big cuts of meat, highball cocktails, candlelit dining, live piano music on Friday nights. By the time I was old enough to appreciate it, he'd upgraded everything from the bar to the riverfront patio. He didn't care about credentials or appearances. He cared about honesty and backbone. When Laura's family made those little comments about me being simple, he'd mutter, "Better simple than shallow," and wink at me over the dinner table. He was the one person who made me feel like I didn't need to put on a costume just to be accepted. And then last winter he died. Heart attack. Quick. Sudden. One moment he was shoveling snow off his back steps, the next he was gone. 50 years of hard work pouring concrete into the foundation of that restaurant gone in a breath. The funeral was small. Laura came, but her family didn't. Too busy, they said. Though I later found out her parents spent that same afternoon at a winter craft fair in Des Moines. 2 weeks after the funeral, I got a call from an attorney near the Lynn County Courthouse. "We need you to come in," she said. "It's about your uncle's estate." I figured maybe he'd left me his tools or a few old keepsakes, something sentimental. I never imagined it would be the restaurant. I remember sitting across from that lawyer, Susan Whitaker, neat little desk coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Attorney," and blinking at the papers she spread in front of me. "You are the sole beneficiary," she said. "The restaurant, the land, the accounts, everything." My throat went dry. Everything. "Yes, Mr. Reed, everything." I didn't know what to say. Didn't know how to tell Laura. Didn't know how she'd react. I kept imagining her family's faces if they found out I wasn't just the grease guy. Not the broke mechanic they could dismiss. Not the embarrassing husband she had to apologize for. But for once, the power wasn't theirs. I drove home that afternoon in my old pickup, staring at the traffic lights like they were part of some dream. I parked in the driveway, sat there for a long minute, with my hands gripping the wheel, and thought, if they couldn't accept me before, they sure as hell wouldn't accept this. And I wasn't wrong. That night, Laura was grading papers at the dining room table, red pen in hand, glasses slipping down her nose. I sat across from her and said, "Laura, can we talk?" She didn't look up. "Can it wait? I've got 60 essays on the outsiders to get through." Typical. So I didn't say anything. Not that night, not the next night, not the week after. Something inside me told me to wait, to watch, to listen. And it didn't take long before I started noticing things I'd ignored. Before the late nights, the whispered phone calls, the sudden showers right before bed. Things I'd brushed off as stress or exhaustion, until I couldn't brush them off anymore. But that comes later. For now, all you need to know is this. Before the cheating, before the cake, before the humiliation at Riverbend Supper Club, there was a long history of people telling me I didn't belong. And a growing sense, slow, deep, almost painful, that maybe they were wrong. That maybe I'd just been standing in the wrong rooms my whole life. I didn't plan on catching anyone cheating. I wasn't snooping, wasn't digging, wasn't setting traps. It just fell into my lap the same way a loose bolt does, quietly, unexpectedly, and usually right before something important breaks. It was a Thursday evening in early spring, one of those chilly Iowa nights where the sun hangs low and the wind cuts right through your jacket. Laura came home late, said she'd been at school helping a student with a project. She tossed her bag on the counter and muttered something about her laptop acting up again. "Can you look at it?" she asked, sounding annoyed more than anything. Of course I could. I'd fixed that thing 3 times already. So while she showered, I sat down at the dining room table, opened the laptop, and waited for the usual update screen to load. But instead, a window popped up, iCloud photos syncing, 127 new photos. I didn't think anything of it at first. Laura took pictures of everything: her students' art projects, her lesson plans, funny memes her coworkers sent. But then the images started appearing in the preview pane. A pair of hands around someone's waist, a motel comforter with a hideous pattern, a man's arm tan, hairier than mine, Laura's face, her smile, her lips on someone else's. My mind didn't race. It froze, locked up the way an engine does when it overheats. I clicked again, hoping I'd seen it wrong. I hadn't. There she was, there he was, Ryan. Her best friend, the guy she said she talked to because he understands teachers. The guy who'd been at our house a few times, sitting on our couch drinking my coffee. My stomach didn't drop. My fists didn't clench. I didn't yell or cry or break anything. I just felt quiet, small, like someone had unplugged the noise from my brain and left only the humming of the refrigerator and the faint sound of the shower running down the hall. When Laura came out of the bathroom, she was in her robe towel around her hair, steam trailing behind her. "Did you fix it?" she asked. I closed the laptop, still working on it. She kissed my cheek, just a little brush of lips, and it felt like being touched by a stranger. That night, I barely slept. I stared at the ceiling while the wind pushed dry branches against the window, and I made myself a promise: do not act on emotion. Not yet. Learn the whole truth first. The next morning, Laura left early for school. I waited until her car pulled out, then reopened the laptop. I went through the email confirmations, the motel receipts, the messages. The pieces fit together almost too neatly. A Holiday Inn off I-380, room paid with her credit card, a dinner charge at a place I'd never heard of in Coralville, a text, same time next week. Another Mike thinks I'm grading papers. The thing about being a mechanic is you learn how to look at patterns. A car tells you it's sick before it breaks, little noises, little leaks. Marriage is the same way, I guess. There had been signs, but I'd convinced myself I was imagining them. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I drove to the Midwest Copy and Print Center to get the photos printed so I'd have a physical copy if she deleted everything. The kid behind the counter couldn't have been more than 19, stared at the picture as it came out of the printer and said, this is kind of intense, right?" "Yeah," I said, "I know." The printer jammed halfway through and he had to pry the thing open with a metal rod. Figures. Even my revenge prep didn't go smoothly. After that, I took everything to a lawyer's office downtown, just a small place near the Lynn County Courthouse. Her name was Diane Lawson. Gray hair, glasses on a chain around her neck, no-nonsense personality. She flipped through the photos, tapped one nail on the corner and said, "You have grounds for divorce. Clean ones. But if you want to confront her, do it somewhere contained. Don't put it online, don't spread it around town, and don't make a scene in public." I nodded, but something in her eyes said she already knew I was planning something a little theatrical. Then came the tricky part. I wanted the cake. Not because I needed drama, but because I knew Laura's family wouldn't take my word for anything. They needed to see it with their own eyes, in a place where the truth couldn't be twisted or buried under polite conversation. So I went to 3 bakeries. The first woman refused. "We don't put photos like that on cakes." The second bakery said their printer was broken. The third, inside a Hy-Vee grocery store, looked at the photo, shrugged, and said, "As long as it's not fully nude, we can do it." Buttercream or whipped topping? Whipped topping, easier to cut. When I walked into Riverbend Supper Club carrying that cake box, Jenna and the rest of the crew didn't know what to make of me. "You really want to do this during a birthday party?" she asked. I nodded, especially during a birthday party. But it still wasn't simple. The printer at Hy-Vee had made the photo slightly off-center. I had to trim the edges. I dropped the first copy on the garage floor when the wind caught the lid. The frosting smudged on my first attempt. Nothing about this revenge came easy, and maybe that's why it felt right. The night of the celebration, as I watched my in-laws take their seats by the riverfront windows, I felt the nerves creeping in, not fear exactly, but the weight of what I was about to do. Because after that cake landed, nothing in my life would ever be the same. And that's the thing about truth. Once it's on the table, you can't take it back. The night of Carol's birthday felt like every other family gathering I'd quietly survived over the years. Same polite laughter, same awkward hugs, same sense that I was a guest in someone else's life. Only this time I wasn't standing beside Laura holding a store-bought card. I was standing in the back of my own restaurant, waiting for the truth to walk out on a silver tray. The Riverbend Supper Club was packed. Friday nights in Cedar Rapids always brought in a mix of folks, retired couples, from the East Side, plant workers from Quaker Oats, wearing their cleanest shirts, a few college kids trying to impress dates. The air smelled of grilled steak, warm bread, and candle wax. Soft piano music floated out from the lounge, a tune Robert used to love. I slipped out of sight as their table filled Carol in her pearl necklace, Bob in his stiff blazer, Laura in her best navy dress, and Ryan in the seat beside her, a little too close, laughing a little too easily. The rest of the clan trickled in: cousins, church friends, people who hadn't so much as looked in my direction for years unless they needed their brakes checked. I stayed in the kitchen, leaning against the stainless cooler door, listening to the muffled clatter of forks and glasses. The cooks were pretending not to stare at me, but I could feel their eyes. "You okay, boss?" asked John, the line cook. "Fine," I said, though my heart was thudding slow, heavy beats. "Just remember," he said, "flipping a steak revenge is like a boomerang. Gotta throw it the right way." I let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "I'll keep that in mind." At 7:14 p.m., I remember the exact minute the lights over the dining room dimmed slightly. That was the signal. Jenna stepped in from the patio carrying the birthday cake. The photo on top shined under the candles, glossy and sharp. And that's when things started going sideways. The candle lighter wouldn't stay lit. The wind from the door kept blowing it out. Jenna waved her free hand over the flames. "Come on, come on." I could see from where I stood that the cake tilted for a moment and my stomach clenched. If she dropped it now, everything would unravel. But she steadied herself just in time and shot me a little wink. Then the staff gathered at the entrance to the dining room, ready to sing. I wiped my palms on my apron and moved closer to the doorway. The singing started slow, a little off-key, but warm and cheerful. "Happy birthday to you." The party guests joined in. Carol clapped her hands. Laura looked around proudly, soaking in the atmosphere like she owned the place. Then came Jenna, smiling nervously, carrying that cake straight toward their table. The moment she placed it down, the room changed. Carol leaned forward, squinting. Her smile froze. Her hands stopped moving. Bob adjusted his glasses. A cousin gasped. Laura's face went pale, then red, then pale again. She whispered, "What is that? What is that?" Ryan muttered something under his breath, too low to hear, but loud enough to show guilt. And then the singing tapered off. You could hear a fork drop 2 tables over. That's when I stepped out. I walked around the corner, moving slow and steady, the way you'd walk through your own home after fixing the furnace, confident, tired, certain of what you'd done. Laura noticed me first. "Mike," her voice cracked. What are you doing here?" I stopped beside the table, nodded once to Carol, then to Bob. "Evening, folks. Hope the food's been good." Everyone stared like I'd walked out of a grave. Carol swallowed. "Michael, this is highly inappropriate." I raised a hand, calm. Just wanted to make sure everything was to your liking. As the owner, it's kind of my job." The room rippled with shock. One cousin whispered owner. Another said he owns this place. Laura blinked at me. "What are you talking about?" I rested a hand on the chair beside Carol. Riverbend Supper Club was left to me in Uncle Robert's will 2 months ago. I've been handling the transition quietly. Carol's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Ryan shifted in his seat, suddenly very interested in the floor. And I continued, since this was a family gathering, I thought it was time everyone heard the truth. I nodded toward the cake. Carol looked down at the photo again. Laura kissing Ryan, the motel curtains behind them unmistakably ugly. Her shoulders sagged. "Laura," she whispered, voice trembling, "you told me he was just a friend." Laura stammered, "Mom, I can explain. This isn't..." I placed a manila envelope on the table. Receipts, emails, texts, and the motel confirmations, if anyone needs to verify. Ryan flinched. "Whoa, Mike, this isn't the place." I turned to him slowly. "This is exactly the place." A few diners nearby pretended not to watch, but couldn't help themselves. One older man gave me a subtle nod like he'd seen this movie before and approved of the ending. Laura stood up shaking. "How dare you humiliate me like this?" "How dare I said quietly. "You brought someone else into our marriage. You brought him into our home. You lied every time you said you were working late." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. For once, the room wasn't hers. It wasn't her mother's. It wasn't her family's. It was mine. I tapped the cake lightly with one finger. "Happy birthday, Carol." Then I stepped back and nodded to the manager. "Make sure they get the check," I said. "Full price." And with that, I walked toward the kitchen door, the dining room parting in silence as I passed people staring, whispering, some even shaking their heads in disbelief. But not one person stopped me. Not one person told me I didn't belong. I didn't sleep much the night after the birthday disaster. You'd think I would have felt triumphant, maybe even a little satisfied. But the truth is, when you've been carrying something heavy for a long time, setting it down doesn't feel like victory. It feels like exhaustion. The next morning, I stood at the kitchen counter drinking stale coffee, staring out the window at the backyard fence I'd patched a dozen times over the years. The house felt quiet in a way I didn't recognize. Not peaceful, empty. Laura had stayed at her sister's after the party. I didn't expect her to come home, and she didn't. By 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a text from her. "We need to talk. Please don't do anything stupid." I set the phone down. Then I picked it up again, scrolled back through her old messages, and wondered when things had shifted, when I'd gone from being her husband to being an afterthought she could lie to without blinking. Around noon, I drove downtown to meet with Diane Lawson, the divorce attorney. Her office smelled like old paper and peppermint tea, and there was a framed photo of her golden retriever on her desk. "You ready?" she asked as I sat down. "I don't know if ready is the right word," I said. She adjusted her glasses. "You're doing the right thing. This won't be easy, but it'll be clean." Clean. That was the word I needed. We went through paperwork, assets, the garage, the house. The restaurant, thankfully, was ironclad. It was mine alone. I'd inherited it, and there wasn't a thing Laura or her family could do about that. After the meeting, Diane leaned back in her chair. "One more thing, Michael. Don't let her manipulate you emotionally. People often try to rewrite the story when they're losing control." I nodded, but I didn't yet understand how right she was. That evening, Laura showed up at the house. She knocked instead of using her key. Her eyes were puffy, her hair unwashed, her voice softer than usual. "Can we sit?" she asked. We sat in the living room, the same room where she'd graded papers, watched her crime shows, and spent nights texting another man while pretending to be exhausted. She took a deep breath. "I'm sorry for what you saw. I'm not saying it was nothing, but I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I let her talk. "It was a mistake, Mike. I was lonely. I felt like we were growing apart. And Ryan, he just understood me. But I never planned on hurting you." I looked down at my hands, scarred, calloused, and wondered how many years I'd spent trying to make those hands good enough for her family. When I finally spoke, my voice didn't shake. "Laura, you told me not to come to your mother's birthday dinner because I didn't fit the vibe. That wasn't loneliness. That was contempt." She blinked fast, caught off guard. "And you didn't make a mistake," I said quietly. "You made a choice. You made it more than once. And you made it because you thought I'd never find out, because you thought I didn't matter." Her voice cracked. "But you do matter." "Not to you," I said. "Not anymore. She cried then, big heavy sobs that sounded like regret or maybe fear. Fear of what she was losing. Fear of what she'd already thrown away. Can't we fix this, she whispered. We've built a life together. I shook my head slowly. No, we built a life I was the only one fighting for. She covered her face with her hands. I don't want to lose the restaurant, she finally said. I don't want to lose everything. There it was, the truth behind the tears. I stood up. You already lost me, I said gently. The rest is just paperwork. She left without another word. For the first time in decades, the house was entirely mine, quiet still, and strangely lighter. I sat at the table and felt a breath move through me. I didn't realize I'd been holding for years. The next few weeks blurred into meetings at the courthouse, dividing furniture, updating titles, signing document after document. Some days were harder than others. Some days I got angry. Some days I felt foolish. Some days I wondered if I'd ever really known the woman I married. But every evening I drove down to Riverbend Supper Club and walked through the dining room. I'd stop at table 6, the one by the river window, and run my hand along the polished wood. I could almost hear Robert's voice. Don't let folks tell you where you belong. Stand where you choose. I chose to stand there. One night just before closing, I stepped outside onto the patio. The river moved slow and dark under the streetlights. I heard laughter from inside, old couples, young couples, friends celebrating anniversaries or retirements, people who chose each other. Not out of convenience, not out of appearances, but out of something real. Jun came outside, wiping his hands on a towel. You good, boss? I nodded. I think I am. He gave me a small smile. Feels good to breathe again, huh? I looked out at the water. It does. Later that night, as I locked up the restaurant, I realized something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. I wasn't trying to fit into anyone else's world. I was building my own. And if there's one thing I want anyone listening to this to take away, it's this. Don't spend your years waiting for people to value you. Don't twist yourself into knots trying to fit someone else's mold. You're not made for their comfort. You're made for your own life, your own purpose, your own rooms. And if someone shuts the door on you, walk into a better one. If this story touched you or reminded you of someone who needs to hear it, share it forward. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories about second chances, real courage, and quiet victories, stick around. Sometimes the best truth comes from the people nobody expected anything from.